Wearing the Lead Glasses, excerpt by Thomas Beller, Places, May 2019. The practice of using maps to chart a disease and in so doing find clues to its cause dates at least to the 19th century ghost map compiled by Dr. John Snow and Reverend Henry Whitehead, which tracked the London cholera pandemic. But the word disease mischaracterizes the problem of environmental lead toxicity. You don't get lead poisoning because human waste has adulterated your water supply, as it did at the Broad Street pump in London's Soho district, where more than 600 people died of cholera in 1854. Communicable diseases touch a nerve of human horror. Witness recent justified panics about Ebola. Lead poisoning, conversely, is not passed from person to person and has no human face. Public health campaigns may tout the dangers of peeling paint in substandard housing, but in general, people don't recoil in terror from a windowsill. We amble peaceably onto old front porches. This has not prevented what one might call the lead lobby from seeking to discredit researchers like Patterson or blaming vulnerable populations for their own susceptibility to environmental pollution. The key tools for deflection have long been disinformation and racism. Historians Gerald Markowitz and David Rosner draw on decades of lead industry memos in which executives openly discuss methods for distracting the public from the dangers of lead poisoning or obfuscating understanding when citizens and consumers do pay attention. In the 1950s and 60s, faced with a growing public awareness regarding the dangers of acute lead poisoning, industry spokesmen began to insist that it was only a problem in neighborhoods labeled slums. If only those parents kept their houses tidy and made kids wash their hands, went the implication, then the fact that they were living in surroundings tainted by peeling and chipping paint wouldn't be a problem. Of course, a great irony of lead, an environmental toxin whose effects are particularly pernicious for young children, is that it tastes sweet. As Markowitz and Rosner report, even this sinister detail seemed to amuse the health and safety director of the Lead Industries Association, a man named Manfred Bowditch, who complained in a private letter in 1949 that these young Baltimore paint eaters were a real headache, and joked in another private note that there was all too much knowledge among Baltimore babies. Quotes such as this, full of such gross, backslapping bravado, have a single plausible defense, which is that this is the spirit that built America. The logic amounts to a moral version of too big to fail. The counter to this argument, if you can call it an argument, is that the meticulous work of historians and scientists like Claire Patterson, David Rosner, and Gerald Markowitz, and also Yandell Henderson of Yale, an incomplete list, though it will do for now, upholds a vision in which human life is valued, and this is also the spirit that built America. One way to think of the lead crisis is to imagine looking at your bank statement and noticing that some small sum has been fraudulently deducted every month for years. You want to get that money back, but you can only stop future deductions. The lead industry has perpetrated just such a fraud on every American. Not that every American has had or has been a lead-poisoned child. In regard to the overall potential of citizenry, however, it has been a form of taxation without representation. Instead of quantifying this loss in dollars alone, it is measured in intellectual capital and social justice. This translates to dollars, and it also amounts to something much more profound, the nation's human capacity. If middle-class children were threatened by a tiny outbreak of meningitis or a potential epidemic of SARS or even a mild flu, Markowitz and Rosner write, the nation's public health profession would have been mobilized, closing down the schools where children congregated, watching the airports for sick passengers, initiating public health education campaigns for parents, developing vaccines, or even isolating cases in sterile hospital rooms, all in order to stem an infection. But for at least a century, we have been taught that poor children of color were the primary victims of lead poisoning, and so the issue and the suffering has largely flown below the radar of professionals who see removing lead as too costly.